future of healthcare has arrived. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are transforming the practice of medicine and improving patient outcomes. This is Smarter Healthcare with AI. Conversations with Dr. Hassan Tetteh as he shares insights into the healthcare of tomorrow and how we can help create it today.
I'm back with Amol Joshi, Ph.D. and Associate Professor of Strategic Management at the Wake Forest University School of Business. We've been talking about how he advises students on healthcare innovation, precision medicine, and, of course, AI. As you know, Dr. Joshi, business creates opportunities that enhance society by providing jobs, security, and products and services that improve lives. Considering the vast business opportunity for AI in healthcare due to factors like increased investment and adoption potential, as well as the need for standardization, where are the key bottlenecks in marrying this business opportunity with applying AI technology to improve healthcare? The stakes are high in healthcare. Errors in diagnosis or early detection could seriously harm patients. So how can we capitalize on AI's business potential in healthcare while ensuring patient safety, given the high-risk nature of this industry?
Yes, and you're absolutely right to point out, first and foremost, the extremely high level of reliability needed. But in terms of the bottleneck, the one that I, from a business point of view, am most focused on or fascinated by is the reimbursement part. Because I think that is kind of the holy grail, if you will, of the situation. And I think you may recall when we first met last fall, one of the case studies I shared with you was the adoption of autonomous AI for screening diabetic retinopathy. And if you remember, as you may recall, the interesting thing about that is it was the first autonomous AI application to have a CPT code. FDA approved this software as a medical device, but there is a Medicare billing code, and it is reimbursable by insurance, which, at least in the U.S. context, is a huge roadblock for anything. The thing that I will point out where business also comes in is the ultimate use case for that technology was not the original use case that the inventors of the technology had in mind. A number of companies developed autonomous AI technology, and they wanted to use it to screen out for diabetic retinopathy. And the idea originally was to put it as part of the clinical care workflow in an eye clinic and say, is there a way to help the ophthalmologist with diagnosing the early signs of retinopathy, which we know is a devastating condition and largely preventable if we can detect it early. And eyes are the window to your soul and to your health, and you can diagnose and detect so many problems by looking closely into someone's eyes. It's a very interesting, non-invasive way to do that. So the original use case was to have this AI technology be an assistant, an electronic assistant, if you will, to an ophthalmologist. Well, ophthalmologists, highly trained specialists, didn't need it. Where it really ended up working out was in clinics where they didn't have an ophthalmologist and they only had an eye technician, and they wanted to be able to screen people quickly without having to dilate their eyes. So the use case was totally different. And the reason I point out to the reimbursement as the roadblock here is once Medicare came in and said, this amount of dollars is what we will pay for this, then the clinics could figure out volume-wise, well, how many more patients do we need to see to break even and to have an effective return on this and to prevent all these downstream costs in care. And that's how the whole business case came together. But originally, they were thinking of it as an adjunct or an assistant to an ophthalmologist. It ends up being more helpful where there is no ophthalmologist in the care pathway. And so I think that's an interesting example. And again, until Medicare came out with the exact dollars and said around the country, this is how much we'll pay, no one could figure out the unit economics of this. How many more people do you need to care for? It works out favorably, and there's a number of companies. And in fact, I'm doing a case study with some faculty colleagues here at Wake Forest to look at this and say, what are the lessons learned that we can highlight? Because this is one of the few areas where there is this reimbursement. At least that part has been cleared up. So from a business point of view, I've been focused on that because I think that is unfortunately the big obstacle, or one of the big obstacles.
I'm so glad you did this. I will have to say, full disclosure, I wanted you to bring this topic up because I think this is really an important topic because you are uniquely positioned to understand this bottleneck that many people don't appreciate. And what I mean by that is this. Our U.S. healthcare system is very unique, as you mentioned, from others in the world. We spend a lot of money on healthcare, yet we arguably don't get very good outcomes. Part of that is many factors that contribute to that. We don't have enough time in this podcast, probably not even in a dozen podcasts, to get to all of that. But the fact that it is a very unique reimbursement model in that cost is largely something that's agnostic to the provider and to the payer. If you were to stop an exchange right now between a physician and a patient anywhere in USA, in the office, in the ER, in the clinic, in these kinds of settings, and stop them right there in that time and say, how much is this costing you? On both sides, most people would not be able to come up with a good answer, an accurate one. And because patients are agnostic to the cost, I think this is where some of the technology, unfortunately, that has really good promise just doesn't see the light of day because they cannot make a business case to monetize the technology or to monetize the solution. Because if you were right, if you cannot get a CPT code or get a third party to sort of pay for it, it becomes very difficult to convince at the point of transaction, at that point of like the care being delivered and the patient receiving the care, for there to be a money exchange that could commensurately compensate for this technology that may be introduced at that particular time. And so when you're advising, because in your role as both instructor, as an entrepreneur, and as a consultant to these folks that are bringing these technologies to bear, how do you advise them to navigate this very important but very critical step that is required for the innovation to sort of see the light of day and to be rapidly scaled and adopted in the healthcare ecosystem? Because it's very important. You and I both know, I'm sure we've come across, I know I have, great technologies that will never get into the hands of the end user and be able to provide a service or a solution, for a problem in healthcare just because the innovation has not figured out a way to get compensated for the solution.
Yes, you raise an extremely critical point there. And I think this is where there's a productive intersection between folks like myself in the business school or business world, medical providers, and health economists looking at it different ways. And I think when we met before, I shared with you my philosophy is be open to AI, but be cautious about the claims that are made about it. Demand evidence. And I think this is one way where something that health systems need to do, health leaders, other folks that are considering adopting AI technology, is to take a hard look at, are there natural experiments where we can get data, where we can look at it? So you're within a healthcare system. One set of clinics have adopted the technology, one haven't. What is the effect over various periods of time? Because obviously we can't do the experiment in real time. That would not be ethical. We have to do a quasi-experimental design, right? We have to take advantage of, so maybe my state, North Carolina, has different regulations than the neighboring state, Virginia, and technology has been adopted. Can we look at the same time for a comparable setting, what were the differences in the outcomes for these adoptions? And can we look at the hard data and say numerically, quantitatively, for settings that adopted this technology, how much did it cost them, and what was the observable improvement? And then what would we expect if it scales nationally? And I think as we move to accountable care organizations, talking about things like shadow bundles and all aspects of value-based care, if the technology is that good, why don't we make it available to everybody? And what would be the impact of doing that? I think we start getting into those discussions. But where I would look to do this is, because we do have all this data, is to do these what-if type of analyses, these counterfactual analyses, and really take a hard look at the numbers and get down to the unit economics and say, does this make sense? Because the thing I worry about is you could price things in an unrealistic way that skews the total cost of ownership, that hides the true reality of operating the system. And, we have venture capital investors who are investing in these companies who are building these technologies. There's some established companies as well, but public market investors as well. They're expecting a return, and they're going to price very aggressively, and that may hide the actual economics of this. And the problem is, it's not like software in other areas where you can just do an update to the cloud and everybody gets the latest version of the software. You have to make sure that thing still works. To answer your question, it's to look for these opportunities to do these experiments and do the hardcore economic analysis and really figure out, quantify the observable differences. Now, that's going to take time, but in a way we have time. We're dealing in a largely regulated business. We do have time to carefully bring this. And I don't think we necessarily have to rush to do that. I think we should carefully take our time and make sure that we meet these objectives, given the high level of quality that we have to reach. And the first rule is to do no harm.
And then, and adhere to. So I'm going to ask the leading question, and because you are sitting where you are sitting, what is the role of universities in this process that you just described of, the experimentation, the ability to validate some of these solutions, but then also to operationalize what the real business case can be for a particular problem and a problem set in healthcare when an AI, technology, or for that matter, any technology is sort of introduced into the system?
I think that's a great question. And my perspective, coming from the university part, is universities need to be proactive and continue to be actively engaged as a partner in all of these things. And I think there's 3 or 4 different areas where universities can uniquely contribute, perhaps. Part of it is we are a nonprofit institution, and we have a broader mission. At Wake Forest, it's pro humanitate, for the service of humanity. So we are supposed to be working on research and ideas and training the next generation of people to be able to think carefully about these different issues. And there's very few other places in society where you have all of these different specialties under one roof, and you don't have a responsibility for short-term profitability, but more long-term societal impact. So we can be partners or conveners in bringing these people together. Dr. Tetteh, in some of your earlier work, I know you talked about partnership and bringing together folks from different disciplines. Well, we need folks from the engineering and sciences side, the medical, obviously life sciences side, but from the ethics side, from the cognitive psychology side, from human behavior. We need to bring all of those folks together. Now, the thing is, it's not just bringing them together. What can we produce that's of value? So I think one is, in our case at Wake Forest, we operate a school of medicine, a large academic learning health system. We should be at the forefront, and we aim to be at the forefront of testing some of these ideas. We're not just going to develop it. We'll test it at a small scale. And if it's worthwhile, we'll share it. There may be a commercial aspect to that, but there may also be a scientific advancement aspect to that. We want to publish research that others can build on, like you said, community knowledge, but there may be a piece of technology that can also be licensed and shared with others. I think the other role that we have that is important is to be an independent voice, nonpartisan and objective in evaluating these policies and making recommendations at the local, state, and federal government level. And I know from your work in the government previously, you know how important that is sometimes to get an outside view, and not just an opinion, but some empirical evidence to support that. And I think all of that together ties into ultimately our mission, which is training and preparing students and leaders for the future. And for me, the challenge is we are training students for industries that don't exist yet, in companies that haven't been founded yet. The next great AI company could come from one of your medical school students who's working with a software entrepreneur and a bioethicist and comes up with a new way to do something that has a huge impact. We don't know what those things are going to be in demand. We know critical thinking will be very important, multidisciplinary, having an objective view of policy and taking a long-term view. And I think that's where universities like Wake Forest and others that I know you're affiliated with have been actively involved and need to play an even more prominent role. Post-COVID, we need to, I think, regain that position as a trusted advisor to society in all of these things.
Well, this is fascinating, and I'm glad you brought up all of those very important themes and topics, because what the audience may not know is sort of the timeline of how you became to be where you are at Wake Forest. You were an entrepreneur, successful engineer, as I mentioned, and then the company was sold, and then you decided to go into academia. So you're coming from a very good perspective in terms of seeing sort of the full spectrum of like, where does the university sort of have a role? I want to just highlight a couple of things, and then as we kind of come to the close of our conversation, and of course we could speak forever, but we have to close it. We have to close it out, and I want to close out in a very optimistic way. I want to just highlight some of the things that she talked about, because I think it's very important. Institutions of higher learning being the center of gravity for convening the folks from business, the folks from medicine, the folks from the humanities, right? The ethics, all of these things that are very important to bring to bear, to bring solutions in an ethical and a safe and an effective way into society. The universities could be the center of gravity for that, because as you mentioned, they are this sort of non-biased sort of standard where you have all of the experts under one roof. But not only can you convene all of these experts, you can train the next generation. And I think that's really key. Not only train the next generation, but recruit the next generation as well. Because most people, and I'm living this vicariously through my son now, go to institutions of higher learning, especially at a time right now where the future of institutes of higher learning is a little bit in question, to seek what they need to do and what they will do in life and how they can contribute to society, sort of find their role and purpose. And so if these institutions tend to be these places where you can convene, where you can develop technologies, where you can test them in a safe way, and you can develop the ethics and also inform policy and sort of the way forward for these solutions to come into sort of play in the society, what gives you the greatest optimism about the future societal impacts of AI transforming healthcare? From where you sit at sort of the epicenter at a university like Wake Forest, and as you mentioned, in other universities that have this opportunity as well to sort of be, this honest broker of a time in society right now where we need an ability to bring all of these forces to bear.
The thing that gives me the most optimism, and by the way, I'm an optimist by nature. Most folks will not be entrepreneurs because you have to be a little bit crazy and naive to try things, or have an unrealistic expectation that you can actually do something that's never been done before. The thing that gives me the most optimism and hope for the future, and I agree with you, a positive note, is our students, and more broadly, the people that are part of the university community. In a way, the generation we're working with now are digital natives. They've never known a life without internet, without cell phones, without technology. So if any group is more comfortable in navigating and understanding those technologies almost from birth to when we have them, it's this generation. And I think they also are not only more digital, they are more global in ways that perhaps our generation or other generations were not, because of the connectivity. They're more aware of things that are going on around the world, and they have, in some ways, that higher level of connectedness to what's going on. So they're not just looking at problems locally, but thinking about it at a broader level. And I think the other thing is that sometimes youth and inexperience can be a great advantage. I tell my students, especially my business students, the hardest, coming from an entrepreneur to being a professor now, what's the hardest thing to teach? The hardest thing to teach is to think big. Most people, when they go out and they want to start a business, they may go with an incremental idea. I experienced this myself. Initially got rejected by a number of venture capital firms. Why? We found out later because our idea wasn't big and bold enough. Once we fine-tuned our business plan and went for a bigger, more radical idea, it was actually easier to get funding than harder. And I think from the aspects of the federal government, sometimes you have grants. These big agencies don't want to just incrementally move the needle. They want the breakthrough, the blockbuster potential, and they are pushing the frontiers of science. So I say that because I'm optimistic that our students will not let what other people tell them be a barrier to their success. I always say, don't let anyone tell you that you can't do something. Think about why you can do something. And that's a hard thing to teach sometimes. I think students sometimes place a limit on themselves unintentionally, but I'm optimistic that the future generation can do that. And I want to say it goes both ways. I learn a lot from my students. I have students in a lot of different, especially my MBA and graduate students, a lot of different industries and professions. They bring ideas to the table that forces me to rethink what I'm doing. And it's a two-way conversation. But I think that everything we can do to empower this next generation of leaders with the tools to make better decisions and use this technology wisely to the benefit of society, we need to get behind. And I think the work that you're doing and others, and I think your book will also shed light on that, and your other writings and speaking will help get more people aligned in doing that. And I think that's a very worthwhile pursuit to have.
Dr. Joshi, this has been an amazing time and conversation. And the takeaways, I was going to ask you for some, but you said them all. And the greatest takeaway, I will have to say, in this edition of Smarter Healthcare with AI, not only did we talk about the 5 super forces that are going to impact AI and its delivery of solutions to our healthcare ecosystem, talked about the center of gravity, that being the university for this place to convene, the ethicists, the folks from the business side of things, and also the folks from the healthcare that are delivering frontline care, to do this delivery of AI in a safe, effective, equitable way. You talked about something that I think is probably the most inspirational and probably the most consequential. Think big. Think big. Because of all the things we discussed, because of this, ubiquitousness of folks now adopting and embracing a technology and using it on a day-to-day basis of AI, I think that we have, probably for the first time in at least foreseeable recordable history in the past, this great opportunity to not only think big, but actually to make things happen that are quite big and impactful at moving the needle in a very substantial and substantive way. So thank you for sharing your experience, your expertise, for the work that you do to inspire and motivate and instruct the next generation of leaders and business leaders and healthcare leaders and folks that are going to be, like you said, developing, implementing, and creating technologies that we don't even know about or don't even exist yet. Thanks to your instruction and for your inspiration. So I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for helping us think big. Thank you so much for helping us think critically about how we can deliver smarter healthcare with AI. And thank you for the work that you do.
And thank you for having me as part of this. And I want to say I really appreciate the work that you're doing too. Not just writing, teaching, sharing these ideas. The people are the superforce, and it's people like you that are part of that. You have a unique perspective with all of your background and expertise, and I would like these ideas that you're sharing to get out widely and be used and further developed so that we can continue ultimately to help people have better lives, which I know is very near and dear to the passion that you have for being a physician and being a healthcare leader. It's been an honor being with you. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And that will do it for this episode of Smarter Healthcare with AI. Please make sure to leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss any future episodes. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
This has been Smarter Healthcare with AI. If you'd like to find out how to bridge the gap between medical experts and tech innovators and discover how AI can make us healthier and more human, go to Tetteh.com. Smarter Healthcare with AI with Dr. Hassan Tetteh is a production of Forbes Books.